Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. A little bit of an impromptu stream. Didn't give you guys my normal couple days setup here, but I was having an interesting conversation with Ostrakon off stream a couple days ago, and I thought it went to some places that you guys might enjoy. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that, and then some of the other news that has happened over the last week or two. But I'll go ahead and start by, of course, thanking Ostrakon for joining me today.
As always, Auron, it is a pleasure to be here.
So we got talking a little bit about kind of the nature and the approach that people are having towards the war in the media, and we'll get deeper into kind of what we talked about in a second. But I want to go ahead and start out by talking about just kind of the weird nature of this conflict and its media cycle. I hate to treat war as a media cycle, but it's hard not to do at this point because to me that's what this feels more like than a war, right? At least when and I know you're very familiar with this firsthand. The wars in the Middle East, Afghanistan and Iraq, in many ways were experienced through the almost the entire American population solely through drips and drabs in the media. So you can certainly say that those were media wars in many ways. But this feels like it's different. It feels like it's very online in a way those wars weren't. It's very social media engaged in a way that those wars weren't, at least when they first started. Obviously by the time they were wrapping up, social media was bigger, but not when they first kicked off. And so you didn't have this kind of relentless push in social media. And one of the things that's been really stunning, and this is kind of what inspired the name of this stream, is kind of Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, his strategy. It's been very clear from the beginning, and this guy is a guy with an acting background. He I guess is a famous actor from the area and everything, and so he has been very media savvy. His strategy has been very based on very clearly trying to bring the West into this conflict. And in many ways, I guess that's understandable, right? Like, for all the talk about Ukraine's level of resistance to Russia, and to be fair, it does seem substantial given what they had. Uh, but for all that talk, it kind of seemed like the effort was long term doomed from the beginning. And so being able to get out there in front of the media, in front of these leaders, delivering these speeches. He's been kind of Zoom conference called in to all these different meetings with Congress and other legislative bodies across the West. It seemed like that was his main strategy, was trying to kind of bring the West into this. And there's even been these awkward videos and updates where he's kind of giving addresses to his people or other leaders, but they seem kind of like with an odd background, and it could just be the focusing and the light, but it did give it that green screen feel, which is, yeah, I made the joke on Twitter, that this feels like one of those videos from Red Alert, from an
Like, or
tactical.
even like the original Command and Conquer,
Yeah, the
where
Command
like
and Conquer games added the live action
yeah,
videos. So that's why I put that as the thumbnail. Tim Curry's immortal performance as a Soviet general in there, because it has that feel to it. It doesn't feel real, and of course, I'm sure it's very real for the people involved in it. I'm not trying to denigrate that, but just the way it's being observed through the Western lens, and the way it's being treated by our media and our punditry, and even our politicians and our president, it feels like they aren't taking it seriously. It feels like a lot of pro wrestling. Joe Biden was talking about how the 82nd Airborne was going to be invading Ukraine a couple days ago, and then the White House had to walk it back because it's old Uncle Joe went off at the mouth again, talking about how and
Dad's
then
drunk again.
yeah, or he forgot where he was. He loses his keys. It's a certain time in his life, and so and then today talking about how basically we have to get rid of Putin and there has to be regime change. It just it feels like at the same time we've seen this movie before, and this is like the worst iteration of it, What do you think about the way Zelensky's approaching it, the media is approaching it, how it's being presented to people, and kind of the long term efficacy of just like basically trying to draw the West into this conflict as your main national security strategy?
Right. So first off, I do like the way you framed this as kind of the first social media war, which it really, while because we were, if Vietnam was like the first television war, then this is very much feels like the first internet or social media war.
Mm,
Now we were in that kind of transition period, in the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, but we were still, like TV was still very much a thing during that. Cable was not dead yet or was not dying as the way it is now. And so, the social media aspect was always there, but it was more in the background. It was, gone are the days of Facebook, and now it's Snapchat and Instagram and Reddit and so it's I guess their positions have flipped, right? The priority of which media sources we are collecting our information or getting our information from has flipped to where the cable news network is no longer the primary source, right? That's almost like a dinosaur, it feels like. And so while it still exists, it is definitely not where most people are getting their information from. They're getting it through Twitter, and they're getting it through Instagram, and they're getting it through Snapchat, right? That seems to be the forefront.
well, and it's so funny because we I think we talked about this last time. The White House brought in a bunch of TikTok influencers to like
Right.
to sell
To
their
sell
foreign
the war.
policy, just to kind of
Or
sell the
sell their
war.
foreign policy. Yeah,
Yeah,
sell their
it's
foreign policy.
not technically the war for them, I guess, officially yet, but to sell basically like their case against Putin to these TikTok influencers. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, who gets their news off of TikTok? You got to be crazy. What is this for? Yeah, not even Zoomers. Zoomers are too old, right, for this. It's are we trying to sell this to 14-year-olds? And then I was talking to someone who's an adult, like, and they were saying, oh yeah, no, I've gotten all of my information on this from TikTok. Like, I've gotten
Oh yeah.
it's not a 15-year-old, it's not a 20-year-old, this is it's someone in their 30s, saying, yeah, I get all of my information on this. Everything I know from this is from TikTok. So you're right that while the boomers and maybe some of the Gen Xers are still getting their information from cable, the younger generation, the focus is, and not, when I say younger generation, I don't mean 12-year-olds. I mean 30-year-olds
Oh yeah,
is
like let's
are
say
getting it.
let's just cut it off like 40 and younger, because
Yeah.
that's about right. That starts off with like the high end of the millennials and further down. So
Yeah, and so,
I would say 40 and younger.
like I said, it was just wild to have someone, and they're not a dumb person, just say, "Oh, I got all of, I'm getting all of my information about the war from TikTok." Which,
And
to be
which
fair,
it all started because they wanted to look at like pictures of hot girls, and this is where it's ended, right? Like it's like
yeah,
I want to interact with attractive women online that I normally wouldn't interact with, and now it's become like a very a very important tool of political policy at this point, which is crazy. I mean, it's no crazier than anything else going on in the world today. It seems completely appropriate, but the fact that we're here is still bizarre.
well, and it's very, now that you say that, that really sparks something in my brain too, because this is what happened with YouTube, right? YouTube was supposed to be this independent creator platform. It's mostly, cat videos and video game let's plays. And then it slowly becomes this media behemoth, and it's where the majority of young people watch their content. They're not turning on, they're not watching the Daily Show or news shows or any of that stuff on cable. They're watching it all on clips on YouTube, and all of a sudden YouTube starts pushing out the independent content creators and starts promoting reliable sources, right? So they start promoting the CNNs and the MSNBCs and even, I don't know why this counts a reliable source, but the late night shows and stuff. They start pushing those instead of their independent creators who kind of built the platform. And so as kind of the mainstream content no longer makes it outside of kind of the cable broadcast, they're forcing that cable style content into more successful spaces with younger people. And of course, eventually you think that's going to happen to TikTok too, right? Already see them talking to these influencers. It's only a matter of time before you start seeing that content getting produced specifically for the platform. And so you still have to get these mainstream regime approved outlets into these alternative platforms. Even if they radically shift the method of delivery, they understand how important it is to deliver it through all of those different channels.
But what's unique about these newer platforms is the platform can talk back. Not just the platform, but the people on the platform can talk back in a way that in the past, right, you weren't able to get. You'd have to go out and conduct surveys on people to see if your message was getting across. In today's world, right, you can see the metrics right away on what you say and how people are reacting to it. So
Which
you've taken there's less downtime between action and reaction now.
which is interesting again because you'll see a lot of these approved videos. YouTube turned off the dislikes because it was so common for kind of these propaganda videos, these regime videos to get completely destroyed in the downvotes. They'll
Oh,
turn
just
off
and
comments.
savage comments as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny because you're right that a lot of these platforms are, again, I find that fascinating now that you brought that up. I hadn't really thought about it this way, but there's all these platforms that were designed to do one thing and brought in an audience based on doing that one thing. And as messages and personalities and news sources that did not comply with the desired narrative, as they became more popular on all of those platforms, the regime has top down pushed through those Silicon Valley companies, saying, "Okay, we need you to alter your content, even though this is not what made your platform interesting. Even though, like you're saying, it was all about feedback and it was all about the ability to comment and interact, and all about finding those niche people, bringing different perspectives. We need you to censor and do away with and hide all that stuff in the algorithm, so people go back to watching like clips of Jimmy Fallon talking, making jokes about Vladimir Putin."
So Red Letter Media, which I really enjoy watching a lot of their content, had a short discussion about this phenomenon, which they kind of called the diffusion of media.
Hmm.
And they were really talking about it more as far as film and television, but they're talking about how there's just so many more platforms today and so much more content out there that in the 1970s you could have a film like Jaws or Star Wars, and it was this unifying social force in that everyone saw the same thing.
Sure.
But when you have the diffusion of media and you have content being produced by so many more people than in the past, you're losing that singular narrative. And so through that diffusion, I think is the fear that their message, which normally has been able in the past been able to be unified, is now so diffused and people can come up with their own opinions and their own content. And if there's an audience there for it, people will come and listen. This has gotten really far off track talking about the Ukraine, but we'll get
It,
back to it.
yeah,
But
it's okay.
it's really related to it.
It is. Yeah, no, it's an
Because this is the
interesting.
first social media war, everyone can look at the unfiltered content and make their own decision and opinion upon what's going on out there, because there are so many individual perspectives that can be represented. Right. And anybody with a camera and a recording device who's in that conflict can offer their perspective in that conflict.
Which has led to some hilarious slash tragic, incidents of people like giving away their
Their
volunteer unit's
positions
position.
and
Yeah,
yeah, and being bombed.
right.
Or the fact that there are multiple groups in the Ukraine all fighting for very different reasons. So
Yes.
you've got far left and far right, which has been, let's be honest, been every single conflict like this. This conflict feels very similar to the Spanish Civil War, and that you got your your Republicans and your nationalists, which you got your socialists and you got your fascists and you got your
Yeah,
all, but they all
inside
have
each
their
one of
own.
these, there's 10 micro factions that are all,
Exactly.
yeah, all fighting for competition. And guys, if you don't know a lot about the Spanish Civil War, I did not know a lot about the Spanish Civil War. And I spent some time earlier this year reading reading a book that really went in depth on it. And you know, it was still very like pro Republican side, but just it's fascinating how that conflict just gets glossed over, and how
It's
much
a
of a
fascinating conflict.
it is. It really is the beginning of the Reddit battalion. Like when the communists are deciding whether or not they should vote for their own, whether they should go on missions or not, and then like they just vote to never go on dangerous missions, and so they're losing because none of their people will go out because they're just voting. You know, in all of it, it's like that kind of stuff is really fascinating, and you just never hear anything about it. You never learn anything about it. And so that I think you're right that that's a very interesting uh it's a very interesting parallel. Another interesting parallel with that is that so many you know, you had so many volunteers that were part of kind of the intelligentsia, and today you kind of have these volunteers but they're not
Most
really.
definitely not the intelligentsia. They're
Yeah,
the
and
they're what the intelligentsia has produced.
yeah,
But the intelligentsia isn't going to risk their themselves in these conflicts, but those that they have, right? It's the let's like the midwits, the people who think they are truly, they're more intelligent they actually are, but who tend to listen to intelligent people are the ones going off.
yeah, someone's asking what books it was. I believe it was called The Battle for Spain. Like I said, it's not a particularly spicy book, but it's just I think it's pretty well balanced for being a mainstream history. It's very willing to talk about the atrocities of both sides. No one
Fortunately,
really.
because it's not a very popular conflict, you can even go on Wikipedia and start from there and learn the basics, and then select,
Mhm.
readings from there, because it's not one that people talk about anyway. So it's relatively unbiased as a starting point.
Yeah. So anyway, now that we've gotten wildly off topic, but I think you're right
No,
that
but
that
it's
it,
not. This is all very much on topic. This is all circling back to the Ukraine.
yeah, again, it's one of those things where again, not to denigrate anyone in the middle of this contract conflict, you know, who might be defending their homeland or otherwise, but it does feel like the majority of this battle, the focus of the president and his strategy is to you know, gain the sympathy of the West, is to find some kind of storyline or narrative that will allow them to come in and get involved, and that makes the social media aspect of the war all that more important because, as you and I were talking about, and this was the thing that kind of became the genesis of this discussion, war now, especially in our kind of mass state democratic age, it feels like everything is sold as it has to be a total war, which is in many ways ironic because you yourself were involved in a war that was very much not a total war in any way, shape, or
No, it
form.
wasn't. Uh,
But this one is billed as like an existential crisis, even though there's been no attack directly on the United States, and that basically like you it's not enough to just hate the leader of the country, it's the fault of the people. And if this war isn't won, then it leads to the total annihilation of the other. It's very much this idea that you can't have two great powers with different interests and different priorities who kind of get to the end of their political discussion and then come to warfare. Everything has to be like a very moral Manichaean black and white. One side's going to annihilate the other. Everybody, someone's got to be Hitler at the end of the day type discussion. And it seems very odd, but it also seems part of this social media strategy.
uh, yeah, it's first off, the fact that they keep comparing Putin to Hitler is still very funny to me, considering that Joseph Stalin is right
Right.
there staring
Man,
down.
is there an authoritarian Russian that you
Right.
could possibly come up with? Any comparison of someone who might have I don't know, wiped out millions of people as an authoritarian leader
Like, I
in
just
Russia.
have this image of him in the afterlife just, like, throwing paperwork in the air. He's just like, "Really? Like,
Yeah.
not me? You're not gonna use me. Like, I'm
Yes.
sitting right here."
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, but, to go back to your question, yeah, everything we frame everything as, which is weird, right? Because we really didn't frame Afghanistan or Iraq as an existential crisis. But why are we framing this as an existential crisis? Is it
Yeah, you
because, I mean, is it just because it's Europeans and because it involves more white people? Like, is that the reason why? That doesn't quite add up. So what, I guess I agree with you. It's framed as an existential crisis where if we don't intervene, it's the end of all things. But why is that different than our last several wars? Let's say Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
Well, it's weird because in all of those wars, you had to basically sell the ongoing nature of low scale threats, right? Like
Correct.
no one at any point believed that any of these countries could wipe the United States off the face of the earth.
Afghanistan and Iraq never had the power projection to ever threaten the United States.
Right, at worst, right, the dirty bomb or the chemical
Right.
weapon
Some
was
sort
the
of asymmetric terrorist attack. That that
yes,
that's the worst that could happen.
yeah, the nightmare scenario they were trying to sell was some guy with, plutonium that fell off the back of a truck, straps it to an explosive device, and irradiates, some number of
Chicago
city
or something.
blocks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, sure.
and of course that's not the case with Russia, though. Russia, while having that capability, again, is not directly involved in conflict with the United States. You can say what you want about Afghanistan and Iraq. I guess at least at some point you could say that Afghanistan would have been a training ground, for direct attacks on the United States. You can't say anything like that about Ukraine, and so it really, I think it's because it's a clash of two truly great powers. Like even though Russia's kind of in this third rate great power status,
Right.
it's
It's
still
still one of the
got the
big boys.
weaponry. Yeah, it's still got the weaponry, and so you're using Ukraine as a way to bully them out of their last kind of border between them and NATO, and no one's really wants to admit that that's the purpose, and so instead I guess it has to be like the possibility that Putler is coming for everyone, and planning to wipe out, I don't know,
Which
a whole group of people.
this seems like a very measured goal that Putin has in taking over the Ukraine, right? He's recreating the buffer state
Mhm.
between NATO and Russia.
But we
And
talked
and
about
and
this.
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was going to say we talked about this last time though, right? Like just a geopolitical reality there that
Right.
anyone who takes the time, and it's, it's not justifying Putin's maneuver, but it's understanding that it's not the work of a crazy man. No, it's a very realistic and understandable strategic goal, even if it's not morally justifiable. It's not the act of some deranged madman. It's the calculated
A
maneuver of
very
someone
cold
who's
and
setting it
calculating
right.
man.
Yeah.
And that is really the crux of the discussion, because we're talking about a situation or a war with a very measured goal. In this case, what we just discussed, basically rebuffering the Russian frontier. But it's being framed in the media as an existential crisis between good and evil, which it's not. Right? These are two powers who both have interests in the region. The NATO, and by extension of NATO, the United States has their interests in Eastern Europe, and Russia has their interests in Eastern Europe. And this is the continuation of the Cold War since the end of World War II. It's just the next conflict, but it's being framed as 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 an existential crisis, which it's not.
Well, and
When you have the framing of an existential crisis where it's an all or nothing situation, the people who are fighting it, or the people you're trying to encourage to fight in this conflict, are able to justify any actions against their enemy, because it's life or death. Like, it's life or death of the nation, which it's not.
Yeah, and you get this weird dynamic where, on one hand, they'll say things like, "Well, Russia's losing, and the morale is terrible," and we get stories. There was just a story today about um, how like an entire Russian like battalion turned on their leader and executed him because they were losing too badly, and another story that the Ukrainians have an inside man that's planning to assassinate and take out Putin or something. Like you
Which is
get
strange
these,
that you would report that.
of
It's
course,
like
right? Like
seems
that's
like
the
something you do after the fact.
yeah, like there's just this constant stream of, I don't want to declare it propaganda, but sure does feel like it,
It's
of I
propaganda.
mean it is, but I'm
It's
just
propaganda.
of course it is. But it's just, it very very hard to believe stories funneling themselves out through major media outlets on a regular basis at the same time, that they're just saying, well, Russia's losing and, Putler's, gonna get assassinated and all this stuff. They're also saying, but if we don't rush in and help Ukraine at any moment, like he could just roll through Poland and then it's all over, right?
If we don't rush in and help the Ukraine and we keep Stalin, that
Right.
they will.
Uh,
Sorry.
uh, uh, decided to bring the dad jokes today, but yeah, no,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
there's just this weird dynamic where we're trying to pretend that at one moment, like, Russia is inept and ridiculous and can't function and is going to fall apart in any moment because of the craftiness and bravery of the Ukrainians, but also, if we're not delivering, the most advanced weaponry and landing the 82nd in Ukraine tomorrow, then it could be, the all out warfare in Europe. It's just this weird dynamic they're trying to sell simultaneously, and I guess it's just the code switch, or not code switching in this case, but I guess the narrative switching doesn't matter. They don't think the cognitive dissonance matters, and for their target audience, they're probably right, I guess. But it makes it very difficult for anyone outside of that media bubble, I think, to really take it seriously.
Could we just please go back to a 17th, 18th century mindset about warfare where it's my empire versus your empire. Nobody's inherently evil. Everyone has their own goals and objectives, and we decide, and warfare is the final, let's say it's the final option of it's the end of the road of politics, right? It's the final option of politics. And then when we're done with our conflicts, we reestablish our political connections to these other empires and life goes on. It have to be so much more than I want my old land back and these are the Cassius Bellis that I have in order to achieve that, and we will decide on the battlefield whether or not through strength of arms, whether or not my position is stronger than your position. And at the end of the day, we'll go back and talk to each other at the table once the conflict's done. Like, not
Well, but
everything has to be the end all be all.
But I think that's the danger of liberalism, right? Like, I think that's one of the things that liberalism does, is because,
I know.
uh,
I kind of softballed that one
yeah,
for you
I
because I wanted
appreciate
to.
the setup. Thank you. You knew the speech was coming,
I
and so
knew
you
this
decided
week was
to
coming, but I
to
wanted I
frame it
wanted
for
to
me.
set it up for the
This is
audience.
why you're an excellent co-host. Yeah, no. So liberalism puts us in this mind frame of transcending conflict, right? We know, or at least the ancient and not that distant modern world knew that conflict was part of life, right? That, like, people were soldiers and soldiering was a profession and you needed them because the world was a dangerous place. And if you wanted to enforce, if you got to the point where you and your neighbor disagreed, well, then you would have to come, to force of arms to solve that disagreement. And that didn't make you evil, and that didn't make you bad, and that didn't make you ridiculous. That just made you human. Like, that was just like you said, that there's a natural end to politics. War is politics by other means. And when the negotiations are done and there's no more ways to outmaneuver using rhetoric or soft power, then hard power is what's left. And your opponent was not evil for using hard power or thinking hard power was on the table, or raising it as an option. They were just a realistic human being. But because the selling point of liberalism was that we're gonna obfuscate the nature of power, and we're gonna kind of delay conflict as long as possible, and this allows us to expand kind of this hegemony that then, because of its enforced kind of Pax Americana reduces the likelihood of full scale wars. We just have these kind of brush fire wars rather than kind of these all out, World War type conflicts. But this was the promise of liberalism, and it in one way it reduces the large scale wars, but at the other on the other hand, when you do come to conflict, everyone, like you're saying, must be the worst human possible. They can't simply be someone who disagrees with you, who has different political, goals, different things that they want their state and their nation and their people to do that are conflict with yours, and then must come to arms. Instead, they have to be evil. They have to be planning to, wipe out the world. And to be fair, having weapons that wipe out the world that does give a little more credence to
Does
that
give credence to that
narrative,
argument,
right?
but this isn't that type of conflict. And this is like a truth that we have forgotten, right? That conflict in and of itself is part of life. And that's like one of my favorite quotes from all time. Louis the 14th inscribed upon every cannon, ultima ratio regium, which, forgive my terrible Latin, but it basically translates to the last argument of kings.
Yeah.
So on every single cannon, he had inscribed the last argument, or the final argument of kings. And that's accurate, right? Conflict is the end of the road of political discourse, or political conflict. It's where politics truly always gets decided. Violence is politics. But what we've done is what liberalism has turned conflict into is a disease or a sickness. And we can go all the way back to Vietnam, or we can talk about Afghanistan and Iraq, because we've separated the soldier, or the person. When I say soldier, I mean person who's fighting, airman, marine, sailor, whatever. We've separated the soldier from his profession, and we've treated conflict as a sickness, and so therefore those who participate in conflict must also be sick.
Yeah, and that's a real problem, because I think that's, as you and I have talked about, part of a larger societal problem that
It is
you have interfaced with, and I think it grows from this. Again, because we're supposed to be progressive, because we're supposed to be moving towards a utopia, we're supposed to be eliminating conflict and issue. We hide a lot of those difficult truths about society and reality, and one of them is warfare. But in general, it's death, it's old age, it's we no one sees people die anymore. No one we shuttle our elderly off to old folks homes. We treat our soldiers as if they're the weird ones when they come home and they understand, kind of the reality of a
the
rough and
truth of
ready life.
life.
Yeah,
Yeah, death is always around the corner.
exactly. And we don't want to interact with that. We don't want to face that truth. We're supposed to move beyond that as a civilization of people. And so we want to treat people like soldiers almost as like garbage men. Don't just do your job and don't be seen. We prefer not to acknowledge that our existence relies on what used to be heroes, what used to be the greatest of your society, the most revered society, and now are basically like treated as this barbaric relic that can only exist because they can only do their job because they some kind of mental illness, or some inability to like handle the real world, or some kind of inability to make it in a different profession. When again, any other time in history, these would have been your leaders. Military service
Correct.
would have been a basic requirement to lead
It was
in a
part of the
political
cursus
regime.
honorum in Rome, right? These are
Exactly.
when it was low on the list, right? This was one of the first things you did. Military tribune, being in a conflict, being in the military, was like step one of you being able to hold political office, right? You basically had to go to finishing school, and finishing school was warfare. But it really does. It's not even warfare, is it? You're absolutely right. It's death itself, and our unwillingness as a society to accept that death is a reality. I'm gonna go on one little personal anecdote here. As you know, relatively recently, my grandfather died, and he died at home, and so obviously all the family, we found him, and we had like a good 12 or 15 family members at the house, and the police had to show up because they got to do a report because of what he didn't die in hospice, he died at the house, and so there's a lot of people. The somebody from the funeral home came, and there were several police officers there, and nobody would be in the same room as my grandfather, and I was the only one. And to the point where even the person from the funeral home and the police officers weren't really comfortable with me being in the same room and making sure that, they handled all the paperwork and everything. They wanted me out of the way, to the point where it's just like, guys, I'm a combat veteran, you know, bodies, even my grandfather, I love him, and I want to be here for him, and I want to make sure that, his body's, everything is good to go, and before you go to the funeral home, and I'm not going to leave the room. It doesn't scare me. And after I said that, they were fine with me being there. And they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no worries." But but that's a thing, right? And in the past, nobody would be afraid to be in the room as their deceased loved one, right? That wouldn't have been an issue. That wouldn't have been something that would have even, you would stay, you would have your wake, you would sit with your loved one and reflect on life and death. But not death is now something that's abnormal and strange. And so is conflict, because conflict is death.
Yeah, no, it's something I've experienced as well, and it's very odd to, you're in the room and people just, yeah, they don't know how to act, and this isn't supposed to be part of their day. This isn't supposed to be part of their life. They're not supposed to see this part of life,
And
and
this is
so
a
I,
new phenomenon, right? This is not
yeah.
something that previous generations would have batted an eye at.
Well, I wanted to read this quote from Joseph de Maistre because it is both true and the most metal philosophy quote of all time. The whole earth, perpetually steeped in blood, is nothing but an immense altar on which every living thing must be sacrificed, without end, without restraint, and without respite, until the consummation of the world, the extinction of evil, and the death of death.
That's a great quote.
It is,
And it's
and
also super metal,
yeah,
but that is an excellent quote.
and it's just one of those things that, yeah, like you said, we don't understand it, we don't experience it. It's brushed aside in all aspects of our life, be it personal, be it martial. We people would just prefer that somewhere police were, stopping robbers by sprinkling fairy dust on them, and soldiers were out there stopping uh people who don't want to do what we tell them to do by firing nets at them or something, or silly string, or I don't know, like some kind of cartoonish. They just want to pretend that bodies disappear, and your loved ones and your grandparents, and just they just kind of just fade into the distance. There's just never this connection to the actual circle of life. We're breaking the great chain, and it leads to very delusional looks at things like warfare, and the way people treat this. We talked about this when we did our stream on World War Clown, and how so many people in the media couldn't do anything but reference like Harry Potter and Star Wars and Marvel movies, because there's
Because
no
that's all
there's
that's the only sanitized concepts of conflict that they
right,
have.
right. Yeah, it's just these people, it's these professional wrestlers in outfits punching each other, and if anyone dies at the end, they can always just be resurrected by snapping your finger one more time. And it's just never having a real grasp, which of course makes it very easy to call for this kind of hyper reality warfare, where as you've said, America's at the mall, and everybody, and then the actual military is fighting the war, and obviously no
We've
one goes to
created
the mall, but
Right. Well, yeah, not anymore, but but yeah, we've isolated the warrior class, and we've in essence created tiny Sparta inside of a large Athens in a way.
And not
where
just isolated, but denigrated.
yeah, not even isolated, but also
Yeah.
looked down upon. Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
it's soldiery is not a profession anymore. It's considered something that you do when when you have no other options, right? I talked about this on Twitter a little bit, how I went and I go through mental health counseling through the VA, and I talked to my mental health counselor, and she asked me if had I ever committed any violent acts, and I looked at her and said, "Yes, of course. That's kind of why I'm talking to you." And then she looked at me and she's like, "Oh, okay, but they were in self-defense, right?" And I'm like, I really wanted to say to her, like, "Is there a man I can talk to at this point?" Because, like, it's like, "No, they were not in self-defense. I engaged and destroyed the enemy, and, it was, I was not in any particular threat in that given situation, but it was my job to destroy the enemy." And so it's like, just even the nature of conflict of self is so foreign. But what the problem is, here's the issue, right? Here's the crux. The problem is this generation raised on Star Wars and Harry Potter and this sanitized media of which we have today are now the policymakers, right? These are the people who are in charge, and anyone who speaks out against them or reminds them what a real conflict is or could be is marginalized. To include myself, I've been marginalized in my profession. I was a military officer. I should not be working as, in essence, a mercenary or a contractor. And you can call it what you want, right? This is I've become the disenfranchised elite. I'm not elite, guys, so like take it with a grain of salt, but like in essence that's what I've become. I've become the disenfranchised elite who has followed all the steps in order to achieve, higher levels, of not control, what's the word? Higher levels of power. In this case, my path to higher levels of power was through the military. And because the game changed, and because I had a mouth on me, and I continue to have a mouth on me, and I was spouting unpopular but factual opinions about conflict, I was basically sidelined, and so I've sold my services to companies as a contractor, because if I can't have my hands on the levers of power. While I obviously didn't really understand this concept when I was younger, at least I can be well paid for my skill set of which I had learned.
Well, and that's the thing is in any other time or place, a military officer by definition was the elite, right? Like
Correct.
that's literally what it meant. You were commissioned because you were of the elite class. That's why you were given command over men, even if you didn't have more experience than them. You were set
Correct.
in the leadership class because of that. So um, I think the only reason you and other military officers wouldn't be thought of that way is because of how disassociated military conflict has become from leadership and kind of our warped power structure. But I don't think it's ridiculous to understand people who have been in that position as kind of disenfranchised elites. But we do have a number of super chats that have built up
Oh
here,
yeah, let's
so
start. Let's
let's
start cranking through 'em.
yeah,
This
we'll
has been a good. This has been a good conversation.
yeah, didn't even notice how deep we are, and we'll still get to the Supreme Court nominee, but a lot of these are on the Russian conflict, so I want to touch on them before we move on to a different topic here. Bolero 393 999. Thank you very much for your support. Peter Zihan, is that how it said? I'm not sure. I don't know that individual. Thinks the GAE's perceived weakness of the Russian attack means that they'll fight harder to go to the Balkans and the Polish funnel, which would mean us we get involved with nukes more likely. I still don't think we'll get involved with nukes, but I do think that assessment of seeing weakness in the Russians does mean it's far more likely that aid will get stepped up and things will escalate. Honestly, it would have been probably a far better thing geopolitical tension wise if Putin had just
They had
achieved his
wrapped it up
objective
quickly.
and called it a day. The weakness that these people have made no these people have made no bones about the fact that this is a conflict in which they think they can basically just bleed Putin, and they're happy to put as many Ukrainians in front of Russians as they need to bleed Putin dry. And a perceived weakness and a perceived kind of unexpected strength from the Ukrainians will only incentivize them to feed more material kind of into that space, assistance, training, all that stuff.
And in
In
this way,
order,
it's like the first Russian conflict in Afghanistan, where
yes,
we supported it through training and equipment, and basically just sent Afghanis in front of the Russians with anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons, missiles and cannons, and the concept was we'll just bleed them dry in Afghanistan.
yeah, and this is that was the payback for Vietnam, right? They bled us dry in
Correct.
Vietnam. We're gonna bleed them dry in Afghanistan, and this is the weird thing about this proxy warfare, right? Like you said, we're back to the Cold War, one way or another.
It
Uh,
never left, but yes, we are
sorry,
back to it.
yeah, and why get into direct conflict when you can have an opponent make a misstep and then try to bleed them out, um, which puts us in this very weird position where everyone is hyper reactive in foreign policy in a way, because no one wants to make the mistake that puts them into an Iraq or an Afghanistan or a Ukraine, right? Because your enemies can just start feeding support uh, to the opposition, and all of a sudden they're just bleeding you dry.
Correct.
All right, let's see. Dorito World Order, excellent icon there. Just found your channel. What a refreshing dose of sanity and discernment. Thank you so much. And again, I appreciate the support and glad you found the channel. Really glad that you're enjoying the content. I always love having a discussion with Ostrakon. So glad you're able to make it today. Let's see.
I feel like we're not talking about anything that's very, that the things we discuss I feel are fairly easy to comprehend, but I don't know. It's weird to me. Like we're not giving some radical new theory to conflict here. This is the way it's always been.
I mean, this is literally my entire channel is just going back a couple hundred years, reading things everybody knew and telling people about them today. So
Right.
that's
It's
that's
like none of the things we're talking about are things that people in the past did not acknowledge as simple facts of life.
yeah, which is something we'll get into with our second topic here in a minute, for
Yeah, it
sure.
is.
All right, so Life of Brian, 499. Thank you again for your donation. Says, as Russia has been the primary target of the WEF, it makes sense that so much of a political class corruption has been centered on Ukraine. Yeah, actually, thank you for saying that, Life of Brian, because I wanted to bring that up too. Did you see the? I think it was the Daily Mail article saying, well, actually, it does turn out that we found evidence that Hunter Biden did basically get paid to facilitate biological weapons research in Ukraine. Uh, you know, um,
Why not?
which it's not surprising to anyone. It's just it's funny. Again, I don't think it's that like right wing anons or on Twitter or Alex Jones are like prophets or anything. They're just saying kind of the obvious out loud, and then when everyone else screams conspiracy, 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 and then like inevitably a couple weeks later it just comes true, they look, I guess, like they can see the future. But yeah, I think all this stuff is predictable. We said this a couple weeks ago when we did the last stream that it's becoming increasingly clear that one of the reasons we need to go to war in Ukraine is that seems like there's been a lot of America's ruling elites have been doing some pretty shady stuff in there, and we owe them quite a bit of favors or need to cover up a lot of things that happen there. And um, so I think, yeah, the fact that people like the World Economic Forum don't like Putin's kind of hopes to establish a multipolar order, I don't think it's surprising that that they need so much of, like you said, their corruption has been funneled through a country that exists on his border.
Correct.
All right, let's see. Pete Budapest here says, Are we ascribing to evil what could be better explained as incompetence? I just don't see a current in game from the US ruling class re Russia, nor do I sense there's 100% invested in their own BS. Yeah, so again, this is
I think the
uh
leaders of both sides believe it. At least
yeah,
those. I don't know.
I think Hanlon's razor is actually losing the battle of 2020 pretty bad, or 2022 pretty badly. I think you can. I think you can contribute to both evil and malice, or sorry, both evil and incompetence here, or malice and incompetence. I don't think it has to be an either or. I think that these people don't have a coherent end game. I think that's true. I think there was a general I think there was a general desire to use the expansion of NATO to pressure and humiliate Putin and weaken the ability of he and other countries to align in a way that would create a multipolar uh, uh, geopolitical situation. So I think that's intentional. I don't think they intended for him to actually take the bait quite as hard as did here. I don't know that they have an in game and everything that they do. That's one of the things I think, again, a lot of people don't like the cathedral theory. They don't like kind of this decentralized oligarchy theory, but I think it explains a lot of this stuff. A lot of people get confused. Well, why does it seem like kind of some of these people are toe in and some of them are complete ideological madmen, and why does it seem like some of them are entirely cynical? How is that? Well, it's because I don't think there is an actual top down marching order on this stuff. I think that it's a collection, a loose collection of people with interests that move in a general direction. And right now, there
But
you
they all
have
move at different rates.
exactly. Some of them want to distract from the COVID madness. Some of them want to distract from the domestic policy that's going awry. Some of them want to just sell more weapons. Some of them have geopolitical or financial interests in those regions. Some of them really do completely buy, kind of they completely drank the Kool-Aid. I think there's all of that. All of that is in there, which is why it doesn't feel like it's one coherent dynamic, because it isn't. But it doesn't have to be. As long as these people hold the levers of power, they hold the media, they hold military industrial complex, they hold all of these things. Then they don't need to necessarily have a one coherent set of goals, plans, marching orders, in points. They just need a general interest moving in a particular direction and encourage on every kind of front that it continues to do so, which is why I think you have all these conflicting narratives of things like, okay, well, you know, Putin's weak and desperate and losing, and here's all the reasons why, but also he's going to march straight through Poland into the heart of Europe and conquer it all and wipe out, all the wrong ethnicities tomorrow. Like, you don't have
Right.
those incoherent narratives by accident. I think it's I think it's because they're really just throwing anything that moves the narrative that direction against the wall and seeing what sticks, rather than having like one set of marching orders that all make sense top down. Here's our plan, here's exactly what we didn't want to get done, here's what we're looking to achieve, here's how it all comes together.
No, I agree with that assessment. We've talked about that before as well, where it's while it's all moving to the left, it's moving to the left at different rates,
Yep,
and
absolutely.
that's
Yeah,
why we get this. It's almost like a market move, right? Like there's everything is within the one standard deviation, but the price will fluctuate.
yes, exactly. Yep, 100%. All right, so let's see. Life of Brian here again. The Russia is losing nerve is intended to prepare the chemical weapons false flag. If Russia's winning, the op is less potent. Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely, we've seen very weird ways that get set up. They denied existence of biological weapons in Ukraine or biological labs in Ukraine, and then but then at the same time we're running headlines about how, well, if there is a biological attack, it's because Russia stole those weapons or those technologies, those pathogens from labs in Ukraine. And now we're getting, stories that, oh, that was all right-wing conspiracy theory. And then we get the stories that actually it turns out Hunter Biden helped facilitate, some of this stuff. And so there is, it does seem like that's in someone's pocket. We also saw this with the narrative that Ukraine was pushing, that Russia was like attacking nuclear power plants, that they were shooting like live rounds in, near reactors or something. And this could, we've seen a number of different attempts to kind of point to weapons of mass destruction or some kind of other thing that would accelerate the need for the West's involvement. And you could be right that is less compelling, I guess, if Russia is seen to be just bulldozing it. If they're winning entirely conventionally, why would they need it? I think that's possible. I think it also is just, I think it's children playing at things. Like I really do. I really think it's just people being like, oh, let's just say he has a tiny dick. Like I think that's really is, just the extent of what they're doing there, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's being going back a little bit about talking about the elites, right? It's they're no they're in the right place at the right time, but they're not particularly more intelligent than anyone else out there. So it's yeah, so I buy that as far as like, oh, we'll just say he's got a small dick because it's funny. Like the more I learned about being near power in general, the thing that terrified me most is like they were no more intelligent or effective, and many times less intelligent than myself. Is like, how did you end up here? Like, by what metrics decided that you would have power and authority if it was not intelligence and wisdom and strength of will? Because you're no more, you're really no different than me, and in many cases, not even me.
Yeah, an unimpressive elite is soon to be replaced. One hopes. But let's see. Our next one here, Inquisitor Z for $2. I recommend Mine Were the Troubles for Spanish Civil War reading. And yes, I've heard excellent things. Of course, everybody knows Mystery Grove, I believe, publishes those. So buy book, as they would say. I have not read those. I certainly want to. That's on my list of things, my very long list of things to read. I've got lots of reading backed up at the moment. But that is certainly one of the ones I want to get to eventually. I've heard very, very good things, unanimously good things about that trilogy of books. But are you familiar with those at all?
I'm not. Unfortunately, I have. While I know some of the Spanish American War, excuse me, the Spanish Civil War, I have not done any in depth reading or anything. I kind of been focusing lately on reading about the Greco-Italian War, which is part of World War II, because I'm biased. But anyway,
Yeah.
I should, you know what, I should do a little more research and study on the
It's a
Spanish Civil War.
fascinating war. If you haven't read
I
any,
know the broad strokes
yeah.
of it, but it's definitely something I should take the time to read more about.
Sean here didn't do a super chat, but I just thought this was worth talking about. He said Starship Troopers was right. The social scientists will bring us to collapse, and the veterans are the only ones competent enough to organize and clean it up. Of course, a lot of very difficult truths in Starship Troopers, including what is it? Enforce my friends is violence, and violence is the only authority from which all other authority derives. It's basically a large amount of what we talked about today.
Yes, it is.
I also want to point out that C.S. Lewis had a very similar point in That Hideous Strength, where
Yes.
basically, which is basically the novelization of goodness, trying to remember all the book titles off the top of my head. Men Without Chess. What book is that? The Abolition of Man. But it's basically, that's his fictionalization of the abolition of man. In both books, he kind of makes the point that like the social engineering is the downfall of mankind, and eventually like it has to go out the window. It's either the end of social engineering or the end of men, one or the other. And I don't think there's as we've said, at some point the trickery of foxes ends, and they run out of ways to manipulate the system and get the last little bit of gas out of the tank, and that's when you see those kind of things change. Let's see. Speaking of, Bolero has done his customary call. Ostrakon, that's why you need to seize the throne. Once again, you have been asked to take the purple and lead the kingdom.
Things aren't bad enough yet.
Yeah,
They need to get worse.
Thrice he has refused you, Bolero. But maybe one day
It's
he will.
when things get worse. That's my answer.
Yeah, take the place. Yes. Um, yeah, Ostrakon for Caesar 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, I've got to keep working for now.
Yeah. Make America the Roman Empire again. Is that
Make America Rome again?
Yeah, exactly. What's make Istanbul Constantinople again? Could be
A
your,
man can dream.
slogans.
A man can dream.
All right, so that's all our super chats on that topic. We are hitting an hour, but we didn't get to the Supreme Court. Do you want to run through that real quick?
Yeah, why not? I mean, we really kind of dug deep there, and we had some good conversation, and this is kind of the last curtail into that conversation, right? Talking about not being able to acknowledge simple facts of life.
Yeah, so to set the stage for those who aren't aware, most of you probably are, but for those who don't know, the Biden administration's nominee for the Supreme Court, I'm trying to remember exactly how to say the name, is Ketanji Brown Jackson, something along those lines.
Yes,
but she is the nominee for the Supreme Court, and there's a whole bunch of background problems. I guess a lot of people brought up kind of her. Well, I mean, there's no other way to put this. Very, very soft approach to the punishment of child pornography and other things. Now that I've just nuked this stream, but there's no real way around saying that she just, the way she's kind of handed out sentences on some of that was very questionable. It was questioned by some of the people on in the Senate confirmation hearing. But the thing that was kind of brings us all together with the discussion that we were talking about was this denial of reality. And that moment came when, there's a lot of discussion on whether or not she believed in, adhering to critical race theory. Did she think it had a place in American life or in the law or in the classroom or any of these things? And while being kind of quizzed on this, one of the senators asked, can you define a woman, right? Something that should be incredibly basic, something that pretty much every human being, every illiterate peasant, every person held in bondage, who never learned a single thing about reading or writing or math or biology, has been able to do pretty much the existence of human history. It's something every 5-year-old can do. People were posting that picture of the kid from Kindergarten Cop. Boys have a penis and girls have a vagina.
Right.
like it's something that should be extremely simple. And her response was, "I can't." And when asked why not, it was because she is not a biologist. That was her understanding. Well, because I am not a biologist, I cannot
answer this very basic question.
Right. So you are in front of what is supposed to be the most powerful law-making body in the world, applying for to be appointed to what is arguably one of the 9 most important human beings on the planet, the Supreme Court, with a lifetime appointment, and you can't give an answer that someone from the 800s who couldn't read one word or write one word, they could easily have identified that.
Which, to be very clear, we all know you could give the answer.
Of course, yes.
It's the mere fact that you were unwilling to say it, which makes you look like a fool.
Right, and this is And of course, like you would expect her to dodge the question. Of course, she has to, given the nature of Senate confirmation hearings for Supreme Court justices. They dodge things all the time. That part's unfortunate, but not surprising. That's part of the process at this point. What was stunning to me was the referral to biology. You must be a biologist in order to identify what a female is. You must have 8 years. You must have a doctorate from a university to answer a simple question. It's this appeal to the expert class, right? This is
But she's supposed to be the expert class.
she's supposed to rule the expert class,
She's
right?
supposed to
Yeah,
rule the not. She is supposed to be an expert and to rule the expert class, and yet
yeah.
she is deferring to the expert.
Well, and that's the amazing thing that you pointed out. That these people are supposed to be one of only 9 people who hold this power. A power that's not in the Constitution, by the way, but don't make me get on my soapbox. Um, uh, One of the 9 people who hold this power to basically overrule any decision of our technocracy. She can't do her job without then referring back to a member of the technocracy who, by definition, has a
Is
lower
her.
station than her,
Well, yeah, correct. Well,
is
that's the
her
thing.
inferior.
That's the thing is right. There's enough gradients, meaning there's few enough Supreme Courts. There's only 9 of them, Supreme Court justices, that they have to make decisions. They cannot defer their decisions to the experts because they are above the experts. And so it looks all manner of foolish when she cannot answer this simple question. And her reason, obviously, like you said, they always sidestep questions, but her logic, her response is, I would have to see the expert to make a decision on that, is what is so what's troubling and hilarious.
Yeah, and so I think you're right that it's obvious it's hilarious to us, but I think it looks entirely legitimate to a lot of people because, again, this is how power is obfuscated, right? In the oligarchy, in the technocracy, by diffusing the power, by having an infinite number of experts, you have an infinite number of places to which to defer responsibility. She's going to make the decisions, or someone's going to make the decisions, but you never hold accountability because accountability is always something you can slough off on. Well, but I'm not this one particular type of expert. So even if I'm the ruler, even if I'm the president, or I'm a Supreme Court justice, at the end of the day, the decision is not mine. I don't have all the information. I'm not an expert. And so, because you always have this infinite number of appeals to an expert class, you have an infinite number of ways to dump your again, your responsibility. There's no culpability for those decisions. You always have the ability to refer it back to someone else. It's very obvious in this situation because it's very simple, but this is what the president does. This is what attorney generals do. This is what congressmen and senators and mayors, and they all do this. They say, well, look, I didn't say this. We just saw this with the pandemic, right? I didn't make these decisions. A health expert made them, right?
Correct.
I'm not the one who said you couldn't send your kids to school. I'm not the one who said you had to watch say goodbye to your dying grandparents on Zoom. I'm not the one who said that you had to lock yourselves inside your home. It's some other nameless, faceless expert. And because they have the knowledge, I'm just a mouthpiece of this nameless, shapeless, amorphous entity of reason and expertise that's actually running the show.
Don't lay the responsibility at my doorstep.
Right.
It's but it's so funny that you use the word appeal, because that's exactly it. It is the highest court. And so we're asking you these very basic questions because there is no appealing beyond you. You are the final decision. If to take it back to the final argument of kings, well, the Supreme Court is the final argument of civilian discourse in the land. So you can't just pass the buck yet again because there's nowhere else for it to pass to. And that's the insanity of it.
Yeah, like you said, this just dovetails in with our inability to recognize basic truths about
Truths of life.
humanity. Right.
Right.
We can't call a war. We can't actually understand what war is about. We can't actually understand conflicts between civilizations or cultures or tribes for what they are. We can't understand what a man or a woman is. And this is what I said, on Twitter. I said, look, in order to have even a semblance of republican government, like at least what we think it's supposed to be, that this idea that is bandied about, you have to have a common understanding of things. if you don't have if you don't have a common understanding of any basics, forget moral framework, just like what is a man and a woman, if your civilization is in conflict about this, then no truth can be self-evident. Even the truth of what is a man and what is a woman cannot be self-evident. It must be up for discussion, it must be up for debate, it must be in the marketplace of ideas. And if there are no self-evident truths, then there is no place for reconciliation. There is no place for compromise. You can't compromise with people who can't even define terms with you. And so if you can't do that, then the only thing left is power, right? That's why we see all of this stuff coming down to naked power. I think Keith Olbermann was screaming about this on Twitter, and it's Keith Olbermann, so take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, he's insane, but he's someone. Someone said, "Well, biological female," and he said, "Well, maybe your definition of biological female is outdated." And it's like, what? So like now, even they're already using losers language, right, by inserting biological in there, because you're admitting that there's other types of females if you're using the qualifier. But even saying, no, I'm only referring to the scientific reality of like species that have males and females in them, even that is now up for debate. That's just that's just a talking point. That's old patriarchal white Christian thinking. That's science that's manufactured to put people's in a box. There's no actual truth to that. And once you get to a point where you can't even acknowledge that basic thing, then let's be honest, talking is over. Like there's nowhere to go
Correct.
with that. And so it's just power all the way down. Soft power at first, but there's a reason that every other journalist is screaming about how anyone who disagrees with them about trans kids needs to be thrown into a gulag, right? It's because at the end of the day they understand this is not something that's going to be resolved by everyone getting together and looking at the new dictionary definition of women and then moving forward.
So I've got a question for you about that.
Yeah.
Based on that statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got people on Twitter screaming that those who don't acknowledge trans kids' rights should be placed in gulags or imprisoned or killed, right? That's kind of the concept.
Yeah, or at the very least, like their children taken away from like hard state power used against
right. Hard state power. But we live in a world where we live in a society where hard power is shunned and looked down upon. So my question becomes, if that's their intention, let's say that individual's intention, who is going to enforce that hard power if nobody's willing? Do you see with the loop back, the feed loop?
Sure.
The yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Feed loop back? Loop back feed? Sorry,
Feedback
I'm
loop?
so sorry. Feedback loop. Oh my
There
goodness. Words escape. You see the feedback loop, right?
Just don't have a stroke on the stream, okay?
I smell burning toast.
Yeah.
No, it's a feedback loop at that point.
Yeah.
If hard power is to only be shunned, and then who will exercise said hard power on behalf of all these people who look down upon them for exercising hard power?
Sure. And I think they know this problem. I think they see this problem on the horizon. This is why they're trying to expand the totalizing ability of soft power, right? Why arrest someone when you can just shut off all their bank accounts, make them unemployable, make it so they can't own a home or rent a place and have their kids taken away?
I get that part, but then you've
Right.
created somebody who has nothing left to lose.
Yeah, and right, and
So
I think the
if you
bet.
take all those things away, if you take
Sure.
everything that society provides me away from me, then now we really got problems
And I think they're
because I
I
don't
think
care anymore.
yeah, I think their bet is to push, as to basically like bleed people so slowly that they don't feel like they have the ability to resist. Which, to be fair, is been working for them pretty well for a long time. And so I don't think they ever think they hit a critical threshold where enough of those people who are disenfranchised decide that there's a problem with that that can't be solved by like voting. But uh, that's also
I,
why I think
I
they.
know we're treading on dangerous ground here, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It would to be very clear here, like th- they want people to be there, right? That's why the January 6th narrative was so important for them, right? By having what happened on January 6th in their kind of propaganda bag of tricks, that gave more power to do things like increase purge your military, increase deployments of National Guard in DC, step up kind of enforcement mechanisms. So I don't think that producing, as long as they remain isolated events that don't actually pose threats, I think the kind of the people who make those decisions are more useful than than threats, right?
right.
Because until it hits a certain threshold, they can kind of control that. And so that's why you don't want to give them easy victories with some of that stuff. Is don't make the mistake of you know making yourself kind of a martyr in that situation, because that's only going to be useful for them, right? But you're right that is a problem, right? They are building up a backlog of people, or will build up a backlog of people who will be in that situation, and that's certainly a liability that I'm sure they're aware of. But like you said, there is just an end to soft power, and the fact this is why they're trying to replace people in the military and people in police forces, because if they decide to switch to hard power, they'd want it full of cronies, not, even if they're incompetent, not competent people who disagree with them.
But if we reach that logical conclusion, what happens when we get somebody like Simon Phoenix from Demolition Man,
Yeah.
who is I mean, that's like
Yeah.
that would be the comparison, right?
Sure, sure.
You get somebody who completely rejects all of society in every form, and they don't know what to do with them. And they like you have taken your people who manage your hard power, right? Your soldiers and your police officers. These are the individuals who you entrust with hard power on the most basic level. But when you've replaced the people who control hard power with something more palatable and sanitized, what happens when you get to somebody like Simon Phoenix from Demolition Man who rejects everything?
Well, you thaw out a liberal from the '80s who could still, enforce the law, and you send them out. No, I mean, eventually, the most diplomatic way to say it is, that which can't go on forever won't.
Yep, that's all we can say.
Yeah.
Listen,
Uh,
we all know the answer. We just
yeah.
can't. Yeah.
So let's see. Charlemagne here says, "I'm not a carpenter, so I can't open my front door." Yeah, that's the logic. And I think the best meme I've seen on this is it's the people from the Notebook, the movie The Notebook, and they're like standing in the rain screaming, and she's like, "Is it raining?" And he says, "I don't know. I'm not a meteorologist." As he's like soaked in this downpour. Um, so yeah, no, that's the level of logic on display for sure. All right, guys. Well, we are running long here, and I think we got to most everything we wanted to. So we're gonna start wrapping it up. If anyone wants to sneak any questions in, we'll hang around for a minute or two to catch any questions that people might have before we go. But do want to thank everybody who contributed and everybody who's been here commenting. Really appreciate really getting big turnouts for the streams and everything, and so we really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
they're
Also,
going really well. It's quite
they
the
are.
audience.
Yeah, and also I took the time. I know I've been super lazy about it. I took the time to rework the subscribe star. So for people who are already subscribed, thank you. I put in actual rewards and stuff for different tiers. For those of you who might have been interested in joining the subscribe star but weren't ready to pull the trigger yet, there's going to be stuff there where obviously I've been thanking people in my edited videos, and that's going to continue. But if you join a higher tier, we're going to read out your name and thank you at the end of the live streams. We're also going to do a. I'm also going to do like once a month, kind of a state of the channel video that only goes to people on the subscribe star, and then like I think the top tier. If I start getting enough people together, I'm going to put together like a private Discord chat only for people on
Oh, that'd
that.
be
So
interesting. We just
yeah,
have
so
a chat every now and then.
yeah, so some give you guys some incentive. I know a lot of people have just been contributing just to contribute, and I really appreciate it and everything. But I know that it's nice to get something. I get it. So I took the time to put that together, and I'm terrible at shilling. I need to do
You
better
gotta
at it. So
you've got to sell yourself better.
yeah, I mean that's I don't like it, but I understand it's part of the thing. So at least now there's there's some rewards and incentives and everything. So if anyone's interested in that, the links are in the description to do that. But that said, looks like we made our way through all of the questions. So once again, want to thank Ostrakon for coming on.
As always, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you guys will get him to be emperor next stream. I feel
Don't
like you
worry,
can do it. Yeah.
I'm the George R. Martin of emperors here. Don't worry, it's coming next
He
year.
hasn't written the last book. There's still time. Um, and yeah, we appreciate you guys showing up. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks for joining us, and as always, we'll talk to you next time.